What happens when a Hollywood star, who has become a symbol of change, clashes with a host known for his sharp tongue and provocative humor? This moment on Craig Ferguson's show became a true television event, leaving the studio in shock and social media ablaze. No one was prepared for what unfolded when Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, appeared on the Late Late Show to promote her new documentary project. The atmosphere was friendly for only the first few minutes, but one provocative question from Ferguson changed everything. The studio lights flooded the Late Late Show set in Los Angeles. The live audience buzzed with anticipation, erupting in applause as Meghan Markle stepped onto the stage. Her elegant ivory dress shimmered under the lights, and her confident smile signaled she was ready for the conversation. She waved to the crowd, eliciting loud cheers. Craig Ferguson, seated at his desk, bantered with the audience, his Scottish accent adding charm to his signature irony. "Welcome, Duchess!" he exclaimed, standing to shake her hand. "Can I just call you Meghan, or is there some royal protocol I need to follow?" His eyes twinkled mischievously, and the audience laughed. Meghan smiled, settling into the guest chair. "Meghan's just fine, Craig," she replied softly but with a hint of confidence. "I'm here to talk about my new project, not titles." Craig nodded, glancing at his notes. The cameras hummed, zooming in on their faces. The show's supporting hosts, typically there for comedic backup, sat off to the side, smiling and exchanging glances. The atmosphere was light, almost festive. Meghan began discussing her documentary, a project dedicated to women's struggles for rights worldwide. Her voice was calm yet passionate, and the audience listened, rapt. "It's about giving a voice to those who aren't heard," she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "I believe stories can change the world." The audience erupted in applause. But Craig, leaning forward, tapped his pen on the desk, his smile sharpening slightly. "That's all very noble, Meghan," he said, raising an eyebrow. "But let's be honest. Doesn't it feel a bit, how should I put it, hypocritical?" His tone was light, but the words cut like a knife. The studio fell silent. The cameras swiveled to Meghan, whose face remained composed, though her fingers tightened slightly on the armrests. One of the supporting hosts, a comedian named Jeff, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, casting a quick glance at the producers offstage. Meghan lifted her chin. "What do you mean, Craig?" Her voice was steady, but a trace of tension lingered. Craig leaned back in his chair, his smile widening, though his eyes remained cold. "Well, you know," he said, spreading his hands. "You live in palaces, fly private jets, and now you're telling us about the struggles of ordinary women. Doesn't that feel a bit out of touch?" The audience gasped. Someone in the back rows let out an audible "Whoa!" Meghan locked eyes with Ferguson, her gaze narrowing, but she still held her composure. "I understand why you might think that," she replied, her voice even but with a hint of steel. "But my privilege doesn't mean I can't use my platform to help others. I'm doing what I can to shine a light on important issues." Craig shook his head, as if disappointed. The cameras buzzed, switching between his sardonic expression and Meghan's tense gaze. Offstage, producers exchanged nervous gestures, one pressing a hand to their earpiece, whispering urgently. Jeff, the supporting host, tried to defuse the situation. "Hey, Craig, let's not be too hard on her," he said with a forced laugh. "Meghan's doing some cool stuff, right?" But his words were drowned out by the growing tension. Ferguson ignored him, leaning closer to Meghan. "Here's the thing," he continued, his tone growing more provocative. "You left the royal family to live your life, but now you're back, lecturing us on social justice. Doesn't it feel like you're just trying to stay in the spotlight?" The silence in the studio was deafening. Someone in the audience coughed, the sound echoing sharply. Meghan's lips tightened, her fingers gripping the armrests harder. Her eyes flashed, but she still tried to remain calm. "Craig," she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion, "I'm not selling a brand. I'm telling the stories of women who fight every day. This isn't about me. It's about them." But Ferguson wouldn't let up. He leaned even closer, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper that carried to every corner of the studio. "Come on, Meghan. You know what people say. That it's all just PR. That you're using these noble projects to distract from your scandals." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Isn't that right?" The audience erupted in whispers. Someone pulled out their phone, clearly recording. Jeff looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Offstage, producers began frantically gesturing, one rushing to the director. Meghan took a slow, deep breath, her chest rising, then exhaled, as if gathering all her strength. "You're wrong, Craig," she said, her voice quiet but piercing. "And I won't let you twist my intentions." But Ferguson just smiled, as if he'd gotten the reaction he wanted. "Oh, come on, Meghan. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a show. People want the truth. So tell us, why are you really doing this? To clean up your reputation after all that royal drama?" The studio froze. The cameras zoomed in on Meghan's face, capturing the flash of anger in her eyes and the tight line of her lips. This was the moment everyone realized what happened next would go down in history. The Late Late Show studio was engulfed in tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of cameras and the click of someone's heels backstage. Meghan Markle's face, illuminated by the bright spotlights, remained composed, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. Craig Ferguson, sensing he'd struck a nerve, leaned back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk. His words, accusations of PR stunts and using social issues to clean up her reputation, hung in the air like a thick fog. The audience, holding their breath, waited for the Duchess's response. Some already had their phones out, recording a moment that was sure to go viral. Meghan slowly leaned forward, her hands, which had been gripping the armrests, relaxing. She locked eyes with Ferguson, her gaze a mix of pain, anger, and unwavering resolve. "Craig," she began, her voice low but clear, each word carved into the air. "You think you can sit here and judge my intentions without knowing what I've been through? Without knowing how many nights I've spent thinking about how to use my platform to help others?" The audience erupted in quiet murmurs. Someone clapped but quickly stopped as the cameras swung back to Ferguson. His smile faded slightly, but he quickly regained his confidence. "Oh, Meghan, I'm not judging," he replied, raising his hands in mock innocence. "I'm just asking the questions people want answered. You know how it works. You're a public figure. People want to know if you're genuine or if this is just another trick to stay in the spotlight." The words hit like a blow. Jeff, the supporting host, let out a nervous laugh, trying to defuse the tension. "Hey, Craig, maybe let's move on to something lighter?" he said, his voice wavering with unease. "Meghan, tell us about filming the documentary. That must have been exciting, right?" But Meghan didn't break eye contact with Ferguson. Her face remained composed, but her fingers trembled slightly as she clasped her hands in her lap. "I'm not here to play your games, Craig," she said, her voice growing firmer. "You want the truth? The truth is I fight criticism, gossip, and people like you who think they can tear my life apart for ratings." The studio fell silent again. Producers backstage exchanged panicked looks, one whispering into their earpiece, "This is getting out of hand." The cameras zoomed in, capturing every move, from the way Meghan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear to the glint of restrained tears in her eyes. The audience was divided. Some watched her with empathy, others with curiosity, waiting for what would happen next. Ferguson, undeterred, leaned forward, his tone growing even more sardonic. "Look, Meghan, let's cut the drama. You chose this life. You left the royal family to be free, but now you complain when you're criticized. Doesn't it feel like you want both the fame and the sympathy?" The words were like a slap. Some in the audience gasped, others whispered. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Jeff looked like he wanted to flee the studio. But Meghan didn't look away. Her chest rose with a deep breath, and in that moment, everyone knew she wouldn't let herself be humiliated. Meghan slowly stood from her chair. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor echoed sharply through the studio. The cameras scrambled to follow her, operators barely keeping up with her movements. The audience froze, sensing something monumental was coming. Ferguson raised his eyebrows, his smile turning slightly nervous. "You know what, Craig?" Meghan said, her voice calm but cutting through the room. "I don't have to justify myself to you or anyone else. I didn't come here for you to dissect my life for laughs or ratings. I came to talk about women who fight every day for survival, for their rights, for their children. And if you think you can reduce that to some scandal, you're deeply mistaken." The audience erupted in applause. Some stood, clapping even louder. The woman in the front row wiped away tears, while the man next to her recorded everything on his phone. Ferguson opened his mouth to respond, but Meghan raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm done," she said, her voice trembling with emotion but remaining firm. "I won't be part of this circus. People deserve better than your cheap provocations. And so do I." She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps confident but her back slightly trembling, betraying the storm of emotions within. The studio descended into chaos. Some clapped. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps confident but her back slightly trembling, betraying the storm of emotions within. The studio descended into chaos. Some clapped, others whispered, and producers scrambled backstage, shouting into their headsets. Jeff sat stunned, his eyes darting between Ferguson and the door Meghan had just walked through. Ferguson tried to regain his composure, shrugging with a forced smile. "Well, folks, that's showbiz," he said with a strained laugh. "Let's take a break." But his words were drowned out by the audience's commotion. The cameras caught him nervously adjusting his tie, his smile looking forced. The moment Meghan left the studio was already going viral. When the show returned after the commercial break, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted. The audience was still buzzing, discussing what had just happened. Ferguson tried to steer the conversation back to jokes, but his humor fell flat. Jeff, attempting to salvage the situation, shared a light-hearted story about the documentary's filming, but even he seemed rattled. Backstage, producers debated whether to cut the segment from the broadcast, but it was too late. Dozens of audience members had already recorded the exchange on their phones. On social media, the moment exploded. Clips of Meghan's confrontation with Ferguson racked up millions of views. Hashtags like #MeghanSpeaks and #CraigFerguson began trending. Some hailed Meghan as a hero for her dignity and strength, while others argued she overreacted, claiming Ferguson was just doing his job. One thing was clear: this clash had become a defining moment in television history. The next day, the media was abuzz with coverage. Some outlets praised Meghan for her courage and standing up for her principles, while others accused her of being overly sensitive. Ferguson posted a tweet joking that he'd be more careful with duchesses next time. But many felt he came off weaker in the exchange. Meghan's reputation, as always, remained a topic of heated debate, but her speech on the show inspired many, especially women who saw her as an example of staying true to oneself under pressure. What do you think of this conflict? Did Meghan do the right thing by walking out? Did Ferguson cross a line with his questions? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated on stories like this.